Montana Territory. February 1883, the snow was falling sideways by the time he saw her. Landon Ashford had ridden through worse in his 32 years, but this storm bit through his coat like knives. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Boone, was moving slow through the drifts, hooves crunching through the frozen crust. Landon was thinking about hot coffee and dry socks when he caught a flash of blue down by the stream. He pulled hard on Boone's reins. "Easy, boy." There, half buried in snow and curled tight like a wounded fox, was a woman. Landon was off his horse before he thought twice. He dropped to his knees beside her. Her dress was soaked, her boots caked with ice. Her fingers were red, her lips cracked. He touched her shoulder gently. "Miss," his voice was rough. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, pale green, lost. She blinked up at him like she was not sure if he was real. She started, but then her eyes rolled back and her body slumped. Landon caught her before she hit the snow again. She was light as a sack of feathers. He slid his arms beneath her legs and back, then stood, cradling her against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder. "You are all right now," he muttered, trying to believe it himself. Boone huffed behind him, shifting in the snow. Landon opened his coat and wrapped it around her as best he could. He climbed into the saddle with her against him, one arm holding the reins, the other keeping her steady. His cabin was a half-hour ride south. He rode fast. The fire was roaring by the time she stirred again. Landon had stripped off her wet clothes, wrapped her in a wool quilt, and set her on the cot near the hearth. His hands had shaken when he peeled off her frozen boots. Her feet were raw. Whoever she was, she had walked far. He was sitting across the room cleaning his rifle by lamplight when she murmured, "Where?" Landon dropped the cloth. He stood slowly, giving her space. "You are in my cabin. I found you by the creek. You passed out." She tried to sit up, winced, and sank back down. "Easy," he said. "You were half frozen. Just rest." Her eyes flicked to him. She looked scared but not panicked. "You live here alone?" He nodded. "I do." She stared into the fire a long moment, then quietly, "Thank you." Landon crossed his arms. "What is your name?" She hesitated. "Nella Pierce." Landon Ashford. She gave him a small nod, her jaw tight. Her hands trembled beneath the blanket. Landon grabbed the tin cup off the table and brought it to her, kneeling down and holding it out. "Drink slow. It is hot." She took the cup with both hands. Her fingers brushed his. They were rough but delicate, like she had worked but not always. She sipped the coffee, made a face, then kept drinking. "You came through the North Pass?" he asked. Nella nodded, eyes lowered. "I walked. My horse gave out 2 days ago." "Where were you headed?" "I do not know any more." Her voice cracked. "I just had to keep moving." Landon watched her. She had not stopped shivering. "You are safe here," he said. She nodded but did not meet his eyes. That night, after she fell asleep, Landon sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He had not had company in months. He liked it that way. Easier, quieter. But something about the way she had looked up at him, like she had not seen kindness in a long time, had lodged under his ribs. He did not know how long she would stay. Did not matter. She was warm now, alive. That was enough. By morning, her fever had broken. Nella sat up slowly, brushing her hair out of her face. Landon had set out a clean shirt and some trousers for her. "They will be big," he said as he stirred the oats. "But they are dry. Thank you." She changed behind the quilt he had strung across the room. When she stepped out, the shirt hung to her knees, sleeves rolled twice. Her hair was still damp. She looked younger today, softer. But the shadows were still under her eyes. She sat at the table while he served breakfast. "You always live this far out?" she asked. Landon nodded. "Since I left the army." She looked at him, something shifting in her face. "You were a soldier." He met her eyes. "I was." She looked down at her bowl. I lost someone in the war, Landon waited. My brother, she said. He died in Virginia. I was 16. I am sorry. Nella nodded. It was a long time ago, but her hands were clenched in her lap. That afternoon, while she rested, Landon hauled in more firewood. The wind had picked up again, and the sky was heavy with snow. He glanced back at the cabin, then at the clouded sky. He had not smiled in weeks, maybe months. But when he thought of how she had looked, curled beneath his coat, breathing steady again, something warm stirred in him for the first time in a long while. By the third day, she was stronger. She helped him sweep out the cabin, washed the tin plates, sat with him by the fire and asked about the mountains. Her voice was gentle but stronger now. He never asked why she had been out there. He figured she would tell him when she was ready. That night she stood at the doorway, looking out into the dark. I was married, she said quietly. He hit me often. I ran. Landon stood beside her. The wind howled outside. You do not have to go back, he said. She turned to him. Do you mean that? He nodded. I do. She looked at him, then not like he was a stranger, but like he was something she had not dared hope for. A man who saw her and did not flinch. She stepped closer. You saved my life. You saved your own, he said. I just helped. She reached out, her hand brushing his, and for the first time in years, Landon smiled. The wind had settled by morning, leaving behind a quiet that pressed close to the windows. Outside, the snow had drifted high against the fence posts, muffling every sound. Inside the cabin, warmth held steady. Nella sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a tin cup, her eyes following the slow trail of steam. Landon stood near the hearth, rolling down his sleeves after tending the fire. He hadn't spoken yet, but the silence between them felt different today, less like distance, more like something shared. I saw a barn behind the tree line, Nella said, her voice low but steady. What do you keep in it? He looked over. Tools, some feed. A few traps come winter. Traps for fox, occasionally lynx. I trade the pelts in Red Lodge. She tapped a finger against the cup. You trap alone. I don't bring much back, he said. Don't need more than I can carry. She let that sit for a while. I used to help dress rabbits. My father taught me before he passed. Said if you can't clean what you catch, you don't deserve to eat it. Landon leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Sounds like he had a good head. He did, she said, a faint smile passing over her face, too quick to stay. He died in the cholera wave that came through St. Joseph. After that, it was just me and my brother. She didn't say anything more about the brother. Landon didn't push. A gust of wind rattled the window panes. Nella turned her face toward the sound, her expression unreadable. I used to like storms, she said. When I was little, I'd sit by the door and watch the sky change. My brother said I was waiting for something to come out of the dark. He shifted his weight. Were you? I didn't know it then, she said, but I think I was hoping for a reason to leave. She stood slowly, moving to the window. Her hair had dried into soft waves that brushed her shoulders. She traced a finger across the frosted glass. I never thought I'd come this far west, she mused. When I left, I didn't even have a map. Just followed the rail line until I couldn't pay for another ride. You walked all that way? Landon asked. She nodded, not looking at him. Sometimes I'd ride a freight car if I could. Other times I bartered cooking, mending. A man in Dakota let me sleep in his hayloft for a week after I helped birth a calf. Her voice caught slightly on the last word, but she cleared her throat and went on. I thought about turning back, more than once. But then I'd remember the sound of my husband's boots coming up the porch steps. That was always worse. Landon's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Nella finally turned from the window. How far's the nearest town? 14 miles southeast, she nodded. And when's the thaw? Mid-March, if the weather's kind. She let out a breath and sat again, this time facing him. I could work once the road's open. I know how to sew, cook, read, and write. I'm not afraid of hard chores." "You don't need to earn your keep," Landon said quietly. "I'd rather," she said. "I've never liked owing." He studied her, the straight set of her shoulders, the way her fingers stayed still now on the tabletop. "Then we'll call it even," he said. "You stay, you work if you want. When the past clears, you choose where to go from there." She looked at him, eyes steady this time. "That sounds fair." He gave a small nod, then moved toward the door. "I'll dig out the barn path. We'll need dry kindling before the next snow." She stood as he reached for his coat. "I'll come with you." "Nella, I'm not made of glass," she said, reaching for the extra boots he'd left by the door. He didn't argue. They stepped into the cold together, breath curling in the air. Nella's steps were careful, but she didn't falter. The sun broke through the clouds in slivers, throwing long shadows across the snow. By the time they reached the barn, her cheeks were flushed with wind and effort. And she was smiling not from ease, but from the simple fact of standing on her own 2 feet. Landon watched her as she bent to gather branches beside the wall, her movements sure if still a little stiff. She didn't ask for help, and he didn't offer, just worked beside her in silence. And when she glanced up, brushing snow from her sleeve, their eyes met. Neither looked away. Nella drew the comb through her hair slowly, the teeth catching on fresh tangles. She sat near the hearth, knees tucked under her, the air thick with the scent of boiled spruce and iron from the kettle. Outside, the wind had gone still, but the sky held the look of another storm, building a pale, clenched silence that hovered just beyond the trees. Landon moved across the room with a strip of cured elk hide in his hands. He'd spent most of the morning repairing the harness, his fingers working with practiced rhythm. He glanced at her once, then back to his task. "Did you leave any family behind?" Nella asked. His hands didn't stop moving. "No one left to speak of." She watched the leather twist under his grip. "Not even cousins, aunts?" He shook his head. "My father died in Kansas before the war. My mother passed the winter after I came home. No siblings." "I'm sorry." He didn't look up. "You didn't cause it." She reached for the kettle and poured a little hot water into a basin. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and the skin beneath was still marked faintly from old bruises, faded now, but not yet forgotten. She dipped a cloth into the water, wrung it out, and began wiping down the table. "You ever think about going back east?" she asked. "Once," he said. "Didn't suit me. Too many people, too many things I couldn't fix." She paused, cloth in hand. "You carry that." His eyes met hers. "Don't you?" For a moment neither of them moved. Then she folded the cloth again and went back to scrubbing. Later, after supper, they sat by the window. The lamp was turned low, casting long shadows against the log walls. Nella stitched a tear in the hem of her borrowed trousers, her needle flashing briefly in the dim light. Landon leaned back in the chair beside her, boots crossed at the ankle. "Did you build this cabin yourself?" she asked. "Mostly. Old Trapper started it, claimed the land, then left it when he lost a hand in a bear fight." Her brow lifted. "And you just found it, paid for it." He was selling off his rights to buy morphine in Billings. She nodded once, then returned to her stitching. "You're a man of few words, Landon Ashford. I use what I need." She smiled without looking up. "Maybe that's why I noticed when you started using more." He didn't answer, just watched the way her hands moved with quiet precision. When she finished, she set the trousers aside and folded her hands in her lap. "You ever been married?" "No." "Why not?" He rubbed a thumb along the armrest. "Didn't see much of a future in it." Her voice softened. "Do you now?" He turned his head toward the window. Snow had begun again, light at first, drifting like ash across the yard. Behind them, the fire creaked low in its bed of coals. "I see more than I used to," he said. She reached out and rested her hand on his. Neither said anything more after that. But her hand stayed there, and he didn't move it away. Landon shaved in silence, the edge of his knife steady against his jaw, steam rising faintly from the chipped basin beside the stove. The morning light came soft through the window, catching on the frost-laced panes. Nella stood by the open trunk near the foot of the bed, folding the shirt she'd worn the day before, her movements unhurried. "I've been thinking about settling somewhere," she said, her back still turned. "Not just passing through anymore." Landon rinsed the blade and dried it on a square of linen. "You mean a town, maybe, or a patch of land, something my own." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "I never had that. Even when I was married, the house wasn't mine." He leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed. "There's a place west of here, beyond the Cottonwood Ridge, black soil, quiet. I saw it once when I was hunting. That land claimed, not that I know of." She turned fully, arms folded. "You ever thought about building more than what you've got here?" "I've considered it." She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "If I stayed through spring, would you let me help?" He met her eyes. "I wouldn't stop you." She nodded once, then turned to the stove and ladled out the last of the porridge. "I've got a good hand with a hammer," she said, placing a bowl in front of him. "Not fancy, but I can keep a wall standing." Landon looked down at the bowl, then back at her. "You planning to put up walls already?" "I'm just saying," she said, sitting across from him. "If we're going to build anything, it ought to be done right." They ate in silence after that, but it wasn't the kind that sat heavy between strangers. It was the kind that came when two people had spoken all they needed, at least for the moment. Later that day, Landon took her out to the ridge. The path was narrow but passable, the snow packed down by weeks of wind. Boone trotted ahead, reins loose around the saddle horn while they walked behind, boots crunching lightly as they went. At the crest, the trees opened to a wide stretch of meadow, the snow lying smooth across the earth. No fences, no marks of plow or hoof. Nella stepped forward, breath catching faintly. "It's beautiful." "It holds water in the summer," he said. "Wild onion grows thick. Game moves through here when the heat drives them down from the hills." She knelt and brushed her hand through the snow until her fingers touched the frozen grass beneath. "I could see a garden here, maybe a root cellar dug into that rise." Landon stood beside her, his voice low. "You see yourself here?" She looked up at him, her cheeks pink from the wind. "I could." He didn't speak, just reached down, helped her to her feet. They stood like that for a long minute, the silence deep but not empty. "Finally," she said, "you ever think maybe some people don't want to be saved, but they still want to be chosen?" He watched the wind lift her hair off her shoulder. "I think some folks don't know the difference till it's offered." Her hand brushed his as they turned back toward the trees. And this time, he didn't pull away. The thaw came slow that spring, peeling back the snow in long, wet strips. Earth returned in patches, dark and sun-hungry, and the smell of it drifted through the cabin windows like something remembered. Nella stood at the edge of the clearing, sleeves pushed past her elbows, her hands caked with soil. A row of seed potatoes lay tucked into the furrows she'd carved with a hand hoe, and beside them, shallow trenches waited for onion sets. Landon stepped out from the pines, dragging a bundle of cedar poles across his shoulder. He dropped them near the shed and looked out at the work she'd done. "You've got a clean eye for rows," he said. "They won't grow crooked if I can help it." He glanced at the sky. "Storm's holding west for now. We've got a few more hours." She nodded and bent again to the earth. The days had taken on rhythm, silent more often than not, but never empty. He'd begun building a frame near the edge of the field, a low-roofed structure with enough space for tools, feed, and a cot if needed. She said she wanted a place to mend and store, somewhere with a door she could open and close with her own hand. He hadn't argued. By evening they sat on the porch, boots muddy, shoulders brushed with sawdust. A pot of beans cooled between them. Nella leaned back against the post, her braid loose down her back. "You ever think about what you'd be doing now if the war hadn't come?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the tree line where the last light was catching on the tips of the spruce. "Maybe I'd still be in Kansas. Maybe not." He reached for the tin mug beside him. "I used to think about it, but it never changed anything." She turned toward him. "I used to imagine I'd marry a man who laughed a lot. I thought that meant he'd be kind." He looked at her then. "Was he?" "No," she said, "but I've stopped looking for signs. I listen now." She took the mug from his hand, sipped once, then passed it back. "I thought I'd feel afraid out here," she said after a while. "I thought quiet would make me nervous." "Does it?" "No," she said. "Not with you." He didn't move, but the silence that followed grew warmer somehow. That night he found her sitting beside the fire, her hands idle for once. The mending basket sat untouched at her feet. "I had a thought," she said. "About that land west of the ridge." He waited. "If we built something bigger," she said, "we could keep others too. A woman passing through, someone needing a place for a while. I'd know how to make them feel safe." He crouched beside her, one hand resting on the hearthstone. "You want to run away station?" "Not exactly. Just a home that feels like one if someone needs it." He nodded slowly. "You'd be good at that." "I think we both would," she said. He reached for her hand and she let him. His fingers were rough, hers still calloused from travel, but the way they fit made something settle between them. "I never looked for this," he said. "I did," she whispered. "I just didn't know where to find it." They didn't speak again that night, but he didn't let go of her hand, not even when the fire burned low and the wind picked up outside. By midsummer, the cabin had grown. A second room, framed and roofed with cedar shakes, stood off the original. Nella's garden stretched wide and green, heavy with squash blossoms and tomato vines. On Sundays, she read aloud from a worn copy of Godey's Lady's Book while Landon carved fence rails. Boone was getting older, but still strong enough to pull the small cart they used for hauling lumber and sacks of flour brought up from Red Lodge. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the cottonwoods near the stream, Nella reached into the pocket of her apron and drew out a ring. It was plain brass, dulled from age. "My father gave this to my mother," she said. "I found it again when I unpacked my things last week." She held it out to him. "I want you to have it, to give back to me." Landon took it slowly, turning it once between his fingers. "You sure?" "I'm not afraid of being chosen anymore," she said. "Not by you." He slid it onto her hand and she leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. That night, as twilight deepened and the first crickets began to sing, they stood together on the porch. The land stretched quiet around them, not empty but full in a way they had earned. He touched her cheek, calloused thumb brushing along the line of her jaw. "Home looks different than I thought it would," he said. She smiled. "It looks just right to me." They stayed like that until the stars came out, the door behind them open, the fire inside warm, and the life they'd built waiting with quiet welcome. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked how two strangers came to build a home together in the Montana mountains, Nella would smile and say only that sometimes you have to get lost to find the right hands to hold you steady. And Landon, standing beside her, would simply nod because he believed some truths didn't need retelling. They only needed living.